Greetings everyone, welcome to Radish Ceramics. In this series, I'm going to teach you how to play with mud elegantly, aka making ceramics. In our very first video, I'm going to go through the basic entire process of ceramics, teach you the fundamental of clay chemistry, and guide you to the studio setups, some of our tools and machines. First, let's talk about the process. The process of ceramics is more or less a waiting process. The majority of time is spent on waiting, but there are some actionary process I have to go through. First, clay has to come from somewhere. So you essentially dig it out of the ground. Literally, it's in the ground. Dig it out. You can use it. Well, you can't yet. So after you dug the clay out, you have to process the clay, which takes the entire process. You essentially put the clay into water, and then shive it through a mesh several times. Let it settle, solidify, and you get clay. That's a very simplified version of processing the clay. And that only gives you like earthenware clay. What do you do after you got the clay? What are you gonna do? What you're gonna do with the clay after it's processed is to wedge it. By wedging the clay, you remove air bubbles and essentially making the clay a homogeneous mixture. And after the clay has been wedged, you can know what to do with the clay. Right? You gotta do with the clay of something, right? You can't just have the clay. You just literally play with mud like you're in middle school, like 3 to 6 year old kid playing with mud, right? So the three main ways of processing or making something, actually doing ceramics, are coil pots, slab pots, and throne pots. Coil pots, you make coils and layer them together to make pots like this. 1 coil, 2 coils, 3 coils, 4 coils, etc. You get the idea. Slab build piece is you roll the clay into slabs like these, and then build them together to make a sort of either a geometric structure or like a round structure. And that's slab building. And lastly is wheel throne, which is the most common form of ceramics, which is also what we are going to teach you the most in this series. Although we're gonna introduce you to coil building and slab building as well. Well, since you have the vase right there, you made like a beautiful vase, which is you're probably not gonna do your first try. You're probably gonna screw up because that's people. That's how humans work. They don't do stuff first try. Anyways, you have this vase and it needs to contain water. It can't really contain water not being processed. It's gonna leak and it's gonna melt and it's gonna get all nasty. So you're gonna fire it. You're gonna fire the vase. But your vase looks decent, but it's not that decent. There's some like bumps and screws over there. The bottom doesn't look flat. That's why you need to trim it, which is mostly for wheel throne, where you wait till the clay is decently dry and you trim the excess clay off. And after you trim it, you wait a little bit longer till it be bone dried, which is you can't really feel any water in the clay. You can put it to fire. There's 2 fire sequence. First, you got a bisque fire. Second, you got a glaze fire. Although some people do glaze fire only without bisquing, but that requires the kiln to run a longer time for all the moisture to go out. But the first bisque fire is essentially what you're doing is you're putting the clay through the first quartz inversion and getting all the water out, getting all the water and moisture out. So you can then glaze the piece, which is putting liquid glass on the piece or whatever other sort of thing you put on the piece. To glaze, make it pretty. Make it pretty. You gotta make it pretty. After you glaze the piece and you gotta put it into glaze firing, which have different atmospheres, reduction, oxidation. You can put it in a wood kiln, a gas kiln, electric kiln. You can do whatever you want. There's a lot of fancy different ways. But after you fired it, you have a beautiful piece. And that is ceramics. Well, not really. Because after you glaze fire it, you might be glaze dripping somewhere and it's like the bottom got screwed up yet. So you gotta grind out the bottom and make it all nice, at least wash it, right? And after that you get a piece, right? You get a vase. Or you get a bowl, cup, mug, which is probably what you're gonna make, mug, because you're a peasant. Anyways, that's essentially the basic process of ceramics. Now, I'm going to move on to the fundamental of clay. What is clay? What's its chemistry? You probably don't want to hear me about what the chemistry is, but I'm going to tell you anyways. Clay is essentially a mixture of aluminum, silicon, a little bit of calcium, a little bit of iron, depends, and potassium, magnesium, sodium, sulfur. Besides the aluminum and silica, the rest of them are just silicon. The rest of it is just potential add-ons. It's a mixture of aluminum and silica, oxygen, hydrogen, yada yada compound, right? But what you're essentially doing is you're making glass, but not really. It's a semi-glass. And clay has three very important properties you gotta know. One is its porosity, which means is how much holes are in the clay. If you have very big particles, you're gonna have a lot of holes in the clay, even though you don't see it, it's like a microscopic thing. It's gonna let a lot of more water through, which means it's gonna contain a lot more water. And what it essentially do is that it cracks a lot. If it's more porous, it cracks more, right? And the second is plasticity. What does it sound like? Plastic. What does plastic sound? What is plastic known for? It's very easy to form. That's exactly what it means. Plasticity means the workability of a clay. The more plastic some clay is, the easier for it to work. And the last one is vitrification time. If a clay has a very low vitrification point, its glass melts faster. If it's higher, the glass melts slower, but it doesn't really melt. It sort of became glass-like. And now I'm going to introduce everybody to the three main type of clay. Of course, there are so many different clay, but these are the three main categories that potters use to make stuff. First, earthenware. It's like this, like red, brown, squishy, it's mud, earthenware. Earthenware is a very, very porous clay. It also contains a lot of iron, which means that's why it's red. And when it fires out, it will become orange or red. It has a very low firing point, about 1700 to 2000 Fahrenheit. This firing point means that you can only fire it at low temperature, even though the temperature is not very low, but compared to other clay, it is very low. It still will burn your eyebrows out, so don't stick your head into kilns. Don't. So this is an example of an earthenware cup, right? If you see the bottom, it's all orangey and red. And they use all this painting material, which you cannot use in higher temperature firings, because these are low temperature glazes. This is the most commonly found in the world. You can literally go to your backyard, if your backyard has clay, of course, and dig it out. It's earthenware clay. It cracks a lot, though. I don't really like to use it. It cracks a lot, and it's just not as fancy as I like it to be. Next is your Budio Pow stoneware. Stoneware is a sort of a mediocre clay. It's more plastic than earthenware clay. It's a lot more flexible. It has a very large range of firing. It can go from low temperature to high temperature, about 1700 to 2300 Fahrenheit. Its color is usually gray when moist, and when fired, also gray. Well, when it's fired, it's more dependent, compared to other clays, it's more dependent on the atmosphere of what it is firing at. So, for example, this is a stoneware vase, as you can see, and it is fired in a wood kiln, giving this very, very nice color to it. So stoneware is sort of a mediocre clay, and a lot more people use stoneware, and it can be used essentially for dining wares. And well, people don't really use it for dining wares. People use to make it mugs or plates, but it still needs to be glazed to be usable for dining ware. That's essentially for all clay except for porcelain, which some cases of porcelain you don't actually need to glaze it to be able to use it as dining ware. I like to use stoneware. It's very it's very just standard for me, standard clay. And now, move on to my favorite type of clay, porcelain. Oh yes, porcelain. It is a white clay and it is very, very pure in chemical nature. Because of the purity in chemical nature, it has this tendency of translucency. Right? If you make it very thin, you can shine a light through the solid and you can see light coming through. But you gotta make it very thin. But that is very easy to do with porcelain. For porcelain clay, you can pull it very, very, very thin without it breaking, because its particle is just very, very large. Sorry, very, very small. I correct myself. Very small particles. Which means it's not really very plastic, so it's very hard to work with. And it tends to soak up water a lot. It likes to soak up a lot of water, and the longer time you work porcelain, the harder it is to work with. So it's a very challenging clay, but it's very, very rewarding if you can get it right. So this is an example of the porcelain vase. It's a small vase. You can see the bottom is all white, nice and white. Very, very fine, very pure, and very hard to use compared to these. I would say that earthenware is the most plastic, and porcelain is the least plasticity, not actual plastic, of course. Porcelain also fires at a very high temperature. It usually fires above 2300 plus is what porcelain is fired at. That gives a very watertight seal for porcelain. Of course, you're gonna fire a glazed fire, because bisque fire is very low temperature. It's essentially where the first quartz inversion occurs, and it's not going to help it work as tight. And that's essentially the fundamentals of clay. But one more thing to add on about fire. When I just said about temperature as a number, you will rarely see that in the ceramics world, because they usually measure it by cones, which are these like literal cones made out of ceramics, and they melt at different specific temperature. So, for example, porcelain is cone 10 plus. So cone 10 is about 2300-ish, and earthenware is cone 4, which is 1700. So it's not a big gap, but cones is what people like to talk about, because we have to be fancy. Of course, you gotta be fancy. It's art. All right, let's move on to the third segment. And let me show you around the studio and introduce you some tools and machines we use to help us do ceramics. Welcome to the core of Ceramic Studio. This is a wheel. You use this to throw pieces. On top of it, that's a bat. If you can see clearly, you put the clay on a bat and throw so you can get the piece out safely and easily. You press down the paddle and it goes like a car. This is a sink. It's a sink. That's a screwdriver. That's a sponge on a stick to get the water out of tall pieces. This is a bunch of texture tool. That's a rolling pin. Other tools. These are used to make ceramic platters. Platters that are oval shaped and different other shapes. We have slips, brushes, ribs, more ribs, different shaped ribs for throwing purposes. And this is a wedging table just for porcelain. This is a hair dryer. No, not hair dryer. This is not a hair dryer. No, this is not a hair dryer. This is a heat gun that helps get rid of the moisture while you're throwing. And this is a drill with a blender on it. And that's a Batmobile. It's like a moving shelf with bat on it. I know, very funny. Laugh. Laugh. Just laugh. Over here, in that far corner, we have the big rolling pin, aka slab roller. You use this to roll out slabs. That's a fire extinguisher. Be safe. This is a general wedging table with logs of clay that are made from, over here, the pug mill, where you recycle old clay and put them through this pug mill to get rid of the air and essentially making it firm. But before you recycle the clay, you have to use a clay mixer, aka do not touch or your dye box. Because don't put your hand in it. Just don't. Don't put your hand. Just don't put your hand in it. Don't. It's dangerous. That's a bucket of ball clay. That's a bunch of chemicals. More chemicals. More chemicals. More chemicals. For mixing glazes or clay. It looks a little fishy, but it's fine. It's fine. We have the kiln. The big kiln for firing. All sorts of firing, electric kiln firing. And the small kiln kind of died. So don't worry about it. That's the scrap bucket with a bit of cloth on it. And over here, we have the kick wheel. You want to be in the video? Yeah. Yeah, hold up. This is a kick wheel. And if you kick the wheel, it spins. And you can see people trimming on it. And these are various trimming tools that helps trim, like that. This is one of the students.
Hello.
Say hi if you can focus on your face real quick.
Does it focus?
Yeah, there we go.
Hi.
And if we move on out, we can see the glorious structure. The wood kiln. It's a ginormous beast that used wood for firing. You just give a tour around the kiln. This is the front, side. Let's go to the back. Yeah, this is the wood kiln. We actually have done a wood firing recently. And we're about to unload the kiln. I'm going to do a special that's just unloading the kiln as a later video. Let me just put a sneak peek through that. So we're going to go all the way back to the front. In front of here, this is a grinder. When you finish glaze firing a piece, you can't trim it regularly, so you have to use this grinder to grind off the glass, aka the glaze that's messing up the bottom.
And that's it.
That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like and maybe comment down below. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about ceramics, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.